Welcome to Speaking of Listening, live on Facebook, or if you're watching a little bit later. I'm Arnie Buss, and I'm going to share this to my own personal page, trying to get this going. Had a few technical issues here. First, it was saying that I didn't have permission, then I just tried again, and here we are. So the thing about these infernal contraptions, these computers that we seem to be spending our life on, you just got to get tough with them and show them who's boss. Don't let that computer push you around. I'm continuing my short series talking about boundaries, because that's something which keeps coming up again and again. I get asked about this a lot. And last time I talked a little bit about boundaries and how important they are, and I want to talk more about that because it is something which spans both acquiring certain communication skills and ways of interacting with others, but more importantly, it's something that is most helped by going inside and getting clear about yourself. In other words, what is okay and not okay for me when it comes to others' behaviors? That's a difficult question. It's a challenging question. And as I was mentioning last time, and can recap a little bit here, a lot depends on who the person is. So when it comes to physical boundaries, that is who can come into my personal space, who can physically be in contact with me, and how they can be in contact with me, and where they can be in contact with me. That's a physical boundary. And that depends on who you are. If you're my romantic partner, then there's one set of boundaries for that. If you're a dear close friend, there's another. If you're an acquaintance or a coworker, there's yet another. And if you're a total stranger, then again, there's yet another one. So a boundary sounds like a very fixed sort of thing. So when we talk about boundaries of our house, or of our land, or boundary between one country and another, or between a city boundary, those are fixed, those are static, those are very clear about what's in and what's out. When it comes to personal boundaries, it's a little more ambiguous, and that's why so many of us struggle with it. And one of the reasons that we struggle is because it does depend on the circumstances. And even for the same person, it can vary from one moment to the next even. So it may be okay to have certain physical interactions with someone, and then at some point it just doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel right. And so from one moment to the next, I say, okay, even though I was okay with this kind of touching up to now, then I'm not okay with it now. And so, in other words, boundaries are like the cell wall that I was talking about last time, is permeable, and yet it's also something which is very important, because like the cell wall, it helps keep us safe and helps keep us integral. So even with emotional boundaries, what is okay to be said and not said? So now, when it comes to that, many times when I hear something which isn't okay, I have a choice. I have a choice to either confront it directly, or if I'm being mindful enough, I'll actually track first. And if you remember, tracking is about listening and validating what the other person is saying, which is not agreeing. So even if I'm hearing something which is not okay, then I may choose to first track that and then set a limit, set a boundary, express how it's not okay to be spoken to that way. First, however, the value of that is it helps clarify what's going on for the other person. And in almost every case, if I'm hearing something which is critical, which is kind of coming at me, it is almost always about some kind of pain that the other person is experiencing, and they're simply expressing it in a way which is not conducive to the relationship. So the thing about boundaries is that, as I said, one of the important things is work that we do on ourselves. So before I even interact with someone else, it's helpful to just get clear about what is and isn't okay, as much as possible beforehand, understanding that all interactions are dynamic, and it's helpful to be mindful and present. You no doubt hear a lot about, be in the present moment. And that's so important. And what that means in this case is being mindful enough about who I am to be mindful about what my boundaries might be in a particular interaction in that moment, because what may have been acceptable in the past is not anymore, or what may have been unacceptable in the past is now acceptable. So just as an example, I mean, if, think of the progress when you first started dating someone. Now, I mean, on the first date, there are, you don't want to be sharing your entire story. You don't want to be necessarily as physically intimate as you would be if you were already in a relationship. And again, I don't mean to be critical of anybody who chooses that. I mean, again, that is entirely a choice. And so there are people who do get intimate on the first date, and if that is 100% acceptable, then I mean, I certainly don't have a problem with that. However, what I've also seen is that I've seen people who feel, sometimes, many times women, but also men, may feel pressured to have physical intimacy before they really are completely ready for it. So, women often feel pressured in that way. And, men, it's probably more rare that they are pressured for physical intimacy early on than women. However, there are kind of more subtle things with men, like there's a kind of a societal expectation that you be a stud and all that sort of stuff, and that that's a whole topic in itself. But again, what are the boundaries? And there's no one right answer. It's different for every person. So if that's okay with you, then that's the only criterion. And if it isn't, then it's important to be mindful about that, so that when things start to come up against those boundaries, then you can be very clear about that and not have them be walls. The distinction between boundaries and walls is a very important one. So again, let's say you're on the first date with somebody, and it's somebody who you get to know a little bit, and you think, well, okay, there could be a potential here. I at least want to get to know this person a little bit more. And maybe maybe they're trying for some more physical intimacy than you're prepared for. And so it may not be the best strategy to just sort of totally reject the prospects of the relationship. And you can just be sort of very clear about what is and is not acceptable. Or if you choose to say, okay, this is this kind of behavior early on is a big red flag for me, and then I'm out of here. Again, the important thing to understand that it isn't about me, it's all about you. What is okay and not okay with you, with different people in different circumstances? That's the most important thing. And do you have the kind of tools to be able to express those boundaries? And that's where the effective communication that I talk about a lot comes in. And the thing about expressing boundaries is that as I've mentioned, the most effective construct for that is what I call an impact statement. And the thing about that is that it is also important to have the tracking skill in place before engaging in this. And I want to talk a little bit about why. The main reason why is that no matter how wonderfully an impact statement is expressed, there's bound to be some resistance. In other words, just in general, an impact statement is something where the other person is being asked to change something, and change is it can be a challenging thing. I mean, it's like when the time the Dalai Lama was visiting New York, and he goes to a hot dog stand and he buys a hot dog. Of course, he says, "Make me one with everything." But so the vendor gives him a hot dog. Dalai Lama gives him a $20 bill, and then just sort of sits there. And then finally, the Dalai Lama says, "Well, where's my change?" And the hot dog vendor says, "Change comes from within." But change is hard. And so and we don't want to change. We all have inertia, momentum. If we've been doing something and now all of a sudden we're being asked to do something else, we don't like that. And so it's natural to resist. And so it's natural for the person you're giving an impact statement to be resistant to it. You're requesting a change, and they may not want to do it. And so you will get resistance. And so it's important to track the resistance. Why? Because you want to find out what is behind it. In other words, there may be something going on that you're unaware of, and that information would be valuable. On the other hand, many times all it is the other person just doesn't want to do it. They don't want to give you what is being asked without a particularly good reason. And so that's where, some of the more advanced tracking skills, in this particular case, something called an override is important. Again, this is something which I talk about in the workshops. And if you're working with me one-on-one, then we go into this and specifics and great depths there. So, what might that look like in the context of a boundary? So it's like if you somebody saying, well, you're just being overly sensitive. Okay, so now, so you're going to have a hard time meeting this request. Or, now another a response to something like that is something that I learned from my wonderful mentor, Selwa, rest her soul. And that is to not exactly agree, but almost agree. So, some say, well, you're just being too sensitive about this. And I might say, you might be right about that. And it's still my request that this happen. The important thing is that if you're absolutely clear about what your boundary is in that moment, that you not get talked out of it. Unless if there's information forthcoming that you weren't aware of as to why the other person was doing what they were doing. And even in that case, it's still important to be clear about what is and isn't acceptable. Something I hear a lot of people, they say, well, I'm just being honest, that's just me. Well, my experience is that, that's just who I am, is just an excuse for bad behavior. So, it's not a matter of being honest, it's a matter of being unkind. And there's no reason at all that anyone has to put up with anyone being unkind to them. Now, as I mentioned last time, a lot of that has to and this is something especially amongst men, where the way that we talk to each other often sounds like we're being mean, and just kind of disrespecting each other. But among really good friends, that's actually how we show affection. That's how we show love, if you will. And it may seem strange, but if that's what's understood in the context, so when I'm, just raking you over the coals because we're good friends, and that's kind of part of how we interact with each other, that's what's kind of understood. So this it's not that the surface words are so important, it's really the underlying meaning. Now, even among men, if there's somebody who I'm meeting for the first time, I'm not going to be, kind of all up in their face the way I would with a very close friend. So again, it's important to understand what the context is. And throughout all of this, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the importance of effective communication and, things like this simpatico approach, which recognizes the humanity of the other person, regardless of what's going on. So even if I'm setting a limit, even if somebody is doing or saying something which is not okay with me, I still come from my aware, loving heart. I still come from an attitude of simpatico, where it's a loving thing for me to tell the other person, what is and isn't okay. And that may even mean that I don't have a relationship with them anymore if they're not willing to abide by this. But that still doesn't mean that I get out of my aware, loving heart. I am always trying as best I can as an imperfect human being to be with my aware, loving heart. And that applies both to the other person as well as to myself. And so if I'm in my aware, loving heart for myself, then I am not allowing myself to be treated in a way which isn't okay. Just as if there's somebody who you really care about, you wouldn't want them to be treated in a way which is not okay with them. And so why would I have more caring for the other person than I would for myself? And again, the whole idea of this is that, intimacy, and by intimacy, I mean the whole gamut of any relationship, not just, romantic relationships, but, intimacy is about sharing who I am with the other person and seeing who they are as within the context of what that relationship is. And communication is so important about that because that is how we interact. That is how I show who I am. That is how the other person shows who they are. And by receiving that with communication is how, how the relationship grows and flourishes and becomes something wonderful. It's very, one of the things that is so rewarding for me is when people who I've worked with kind of share how the kind of communication skills that I assist with them are affecting them. Just earlier today, I got a text message from from someone in a couple that I work with, and said, okay, we're having some problems, and we're having difficulty working it out. Could we schedule a session with you? Of course. So and then a short while later, I got another text says, oh, by the way, we used our communication skills and worked it all out, so we don't need it. So so in a way, I'm putting myself out of business, but that's gratifying. That's gratifying to know that these skills are out there in the world. They are impacting relationships for the better, all in everybody who I come in contact with. So that's something which kind of gives me just a lot of gratification. So I'm very thankful for that. And today, being September 15th, I am going to end things a little bit early today. Again, talking about boundaries, the importance of boundaries, how boundaries really bring together all of the important communication skills that I teach and work with people. There is going to be some exciting new developments, sort of stay tuned for that. Watch out for that. I'm going to have some announcements about some upcoming things that I'm very excited about. So I look forward to that. And what I ask of you today is, if you're listening to this, wherever that may be, put in the chat how you deal with boundaries, what successes you have and what struggles you might have. And also, if there's anything about communication that you'd like to hear me talk about, put that in the chat as well too. I will be reading each one of those and trying to respond as best I can. And until then, I look forward to maybe hearing from you. Again, put your comments in the chat. I look forward to reading each and every one of them.